Welcome to the Geeky Medics podcast, where I interview interesting doctors and healthcare professionals from a range of backgrounds. This episode will take a slightly different format, primarily aiming to give those of you who are about to start your foundation years a bit of insight and advice about starting the job. Today we're joined by 4 foundation year 1 doctors from across the country, all here to give their pearls of wisdom to those of us who are about to be thrown into doctoring a little bit earlier than we expected. We'll talk about everything from prioritising jobs on call, surviving ward rounds and maintaining a good work-life balance. So let's get cracking.
Hi, my name's Elgan. I'm currently an F1 at North Tees and Hartlepool Trust.
I'm Kitty. I'm an academic foundation doctor at Bolton.
So my name's Edwin. I'm an academic F1 based in Ipswich Hospital.
Hello, my name is Jess. I'm currently an F1 in the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Kings Lynn.
So starting with Kitty, are you enjoying the job?
It's mainly been really good, actually. For me, it was definitely really nice to feel part of the team. As a med student, a lot of the time I felt quite in the way and sort of like I was using up other people's time. So actually being useful and being wanted to be there and being on placement for more than, 2 weeks or whatever has been really nice.
Yes, absolutely. It's terrifying. I was absolutely terrified at the start, but I wouldn't change it for the world. Absolutely. It's such an incredible job, and I'm happy to go to work. I'm happy leaving work, and I can't imagine any other job that give me a smile on my face like this.
In contrast, what did the doctors think was the worst part of their job?
I think for me personally, the worst bit of the job is when someone passes away. I thought I was getting better at it, but someone passed away on Friday. I watched them die, and I thought I was getting over it and getting better with it, but I think it really does knock you. I think that is the worst part. Yeah, definitely.
And how do you have a way of sort of coping with that, or just is it just chatting to people, or just sort of running through in your mind?
I think it's really important to chat to people. Like when it happened on Friday, a registrar that I've become quite good friends with found me, and I had a little cry. And I think that's also another thing. It's okay to have a little cry every now and then. I'm not saying that the job's miserable, but sometimes you do bottle up these emotions. And I think it's important to talk to your colleagues, especially ones you've become mates with. I think it's important to not bottle it up.
Personally, I'm terrified of making mistakes. What are some common mistakes to be aware of on the wards?
Biggest mistake is always coming from drug charts, which is really interesting because we're still on a paper chart basis, and loads of hospitals are moving on to electronic prescribing at the moment. But on the drug chart basis, we've done our PSA exams now, so we know, we should be on top of our game. But it's still so funny how many common mistakes you get. Something as simple as not giving a route, or not circling how often you want it to be given, or just even signing your name away. It's just these kind of small mistakes. And so often I'll get bleeped from a nurse, can you come and correct this? Can you just circle this? Are you sure you want to give these 2 drugs together? And they're just like common mistakes that you'd think, wait, actually we've done this again and again. It's probably the most common mistake that I'd probably pick out from any F1 actually.
There's nothing that you can't learn on the job, and equally with practical skills and stuff, there's nothing you can't learn, and you will get better because you're doing it all more. You can't avoid it. I think it's being assertive. Sometimes there are non-urgent jobs that can wait, and when you're trying to book leave and things, or you're trying to work out who your new rota coordinator is, you don't need to be apologetic about it. Those are things that you have a right to know and be able to do. The
night does finish, the day team does arrive, the handover does happen, and you are allowed to hand over jobs. I think that I was always afraid of giving. I thought if I ever had to hand over something, I'd done a bad shift, or I'd failed at my shift, and that's not true. Everyone expects stuff to be handed over, and that's absolutely fine.
Given that final year students are going to be starting jobs in the next week or so, what do the doctors think are the most important things to go over before starting the job?
I think one of the most common, I wouldn't say maybe emergencies, but common calls that gets people quite worried is around blood sugars. And it's kind of knowing if someone's got a low blood sugar, just knowing the kind of protocol and the guidance to go through. Have a look at your trust guidance, have a look at the NICE guidance. But for example, if someone's got a low blood sugar in hospital, you're going to need to be looking at their consciousness level. If they're conscious, trying to avoid going down the IV route. If they are able to kind of get some oral intake, use some sugary drinks. Make sure they do actually have sugar in. I've seen some people give Coke Zero. Make sure you're giving proper jelly babies, giving the actual sugar. Trying to avoid the IV route, but don't be afraid if they have impaired consciousness level, if they're not able to eat or swallow. Is knowing that you need to give IV dextrose. Especially
in your first week, you get called to deal with a CBG of 100, not 100, but a CBG of like 30, and you think, oh crap, what do I do with a blood sugar of 30? And actually, it's quite simple. I can say this having been an F1 in diabetes, so I'm quite au fait with it, with most diabetes stuff. But I think, just think about the fact that you need to understand what is the blood sugar at this moment in time, what is their ketones, because you need to rule out that they're not in decay, regardless if they're type 1 or type 2 diabetics. You need to think about these two hand in hand. So when you get called to ask to see a patient, think about these two hand in hand. Think about, what type of diabetes do they have and whether insulin needs to be started. If they're already on insulin, then it's likely you just need to give them a top up of their Acton/Novorapid, depending on your kind of trust guidelines. But it's probably one of the most common things I get called about is, can you come and see this patient about their blood sugars? Secondly is probably AKI related. A lot of times, again, it's just common things that you need to think about. Have a look. Have they, is it pre-renal, renal, or post-renal? To try and divide it into these things. Are they hypervolemic? Do you need to top up the kind of fluids? Do you need to stop anything in the drug charts? Is there something that's blocking, the urine from coming out? So it's just dividing into these simple things.
So when you're on the ward, there's always someone to ask. When you're on calls and things, the most common things I've been asked to go and see are chest pain, falls reviews. They're really common, especially about 6 a.m. when everyone starts waking up. High and low blood sugars. But what I would say is you're not going to be able to revise every emergency or remember it. For every single patient that I'm asked to go and see on a night, just do an A to E.
Yeah.
You feel like a bit of a prat sometimes, but just do an A to E because you'll cover everything.
Yeah.
And then even if you don't know what on earth is wrong, if you've done an A to E and come up with something vaguely sensible, like maybe let's get some obs and I'll put a cannula in and take some bloods off, at least then when you call the reg to be like, honestly, I don't know, you've got something to say.
Dealing with nights is another intimidating prospect lots of medical students want to know how to deal with. How should we prepare for them, and what tips and tricks are there for surviving nights?
Before my first night shift, I was so anxious. I was so scared about night shifts. I don't know why. I think just everyone talks about how terrible a night shift is. So you do get it into your head and you ruminate quite a lot. It's like, oh my God, it's going to be the worst thing ever. I think it really is important to try and sleep before a night shift. I know it's easier said than done, but my first night shift ever, I didn't sleep during the day and I went to bed quite early the night before, so I ended up being up for about 36 hours and by the end of the night you're just so exhausted. Try and, if you're not living near the hospital, always make sure you've booked accommodation. Most hospitals legally now have to ensure that you've got accommodation if you're on call. So I live like an hour away from my hospital, so I never drive after a night shift.
So I think for night shifts and kind of preparing for night shifts, it's an incredibly personal and kind of, it's incredibly personal, and it's working out what works for you. So for me, I don't particularly work well if the day before a night shift, I don't particularly stay up late. I try and make sure that my kind of transition is a bit more gradual. So the night, if I finish at say 5 p.m. From my normal shift and I've got a night shift the next day, I won't try and stay up to 6 o'clock the next morning, 7 o'clock the next morning. I'll probably just try and catch up on some things that I need to do, just relax, watch some TV, try and sit a little bit later, but nothing extreme. And then the next day, no alarm, set no alarm. Make sure that my environment's set up quite well. So my room, I've got my blinds down, It's quite nice and quiet. The temperature's the right temperature. I've got my eye mask on, then putting some hearing plugs, and then set no alarm and just sleep in as long as possible the next day.
Personally, the night before will try and stay up as late as possible. So I'll stay up till sort of 3 a.m. maybe, just watching films, relaxing. I'll probably have a coffee at like 10 at night to try and keep myself awake. And just, have a nice chill evening, watching films, getting all cozy. Then I'll try and sleep in as late as possible. You'll only manage it till about midday. Then just have a really lovely lazy day, watch a bit of Netflix, maybe have a little walk.
Yeah.
Because you're going to have to stay up all night. The first night is a bit grim. You're going to feel a little bit rubbish. About 4 a.m, everyone crashes. 4 a.m, you need to put on a big hoodie, have a cup of coffee, and find someone to have a chat with.
So it seems like everyone has a different routine for coping with nights, and we'll need to just see how it works when we start. I'm sure that's the same for staying organised on the wards, but I wonder if there's any key ways to maximise organisation and prioritisation of jobs.
When you first start on the job, you will end up prioritising everything.
Yeah.
And it's just natural. But I think as time goes on, you kind of learn to push these things onto the what can be held on and what can't be held on. Giving a patient update, if a patient asks, at 11 o'clock at night, they want an update on the situation. If it's acutely and they've just been admitted, fair enough that there isn't a lot that's happened, so you probably could update them quite well. But, if it's something that they've been here for the last 4 weeks, they just want a general update, 11 o'clock at night for you to speed read what's going on to the notes is probably not the best thing to be able to do. You could probably have a look at the last day or so and give them an update what's happened recently. But some of these things that you realise, actually, this is probably better, one, for the day team to do, or two, when there's more staff that they can do it. I think during your induction week is probably the best week to try and pick it up, but it's just to know how things work on the ward. I think the worst thing you can ever do is turn up and think you can change this or you can do it in your set ways, because actually you are joining on a system that's been working for however long. So you don't want to make any drastic changes that you might expect to make, but just rock up and see how the day-to-day bits work. The ward round starts at 9 a.m. Rock up a little bit beforehand and see how the F1 there kind of preps it from something as simple as knowing where to get paper, continuation sheets, something as simple as knowing where DNA CPR forms are, just having these aspects ready so that when day one rocks up and they say, okay, consultant says, have we discussed DNA CPR? Do we have a form ready? It's not the fact that you're carrying every single thing on you, but it's the fact that you know where you can go roughly to go and find these.
So sometimes you're quite unlucky and have a consultant who will, before you've gotten any of the notes and anything prepared, be talking to patients and you're running around trying to find everything. Of course, you can't find the drug chart. I'm quite unlucky that my hospital still paper notes and paper drug charts. So trying to run around after the consultant can be a bit hectic at times. I think usually you're not on a ward round by yourself, at least not in surgery. I think it's quite typical. There's a big group of you. I think it's important that you've got your list, and your list is in order of where the patients are. So on surgery, patients are all over the hospital. So make sure all my patients on one ward are all together so that you're reading it in order.
Yeah.
I also have pens in different colours. So a red pen or something, for example, just to, I don't know, when I'm writing the jobs, write the most important jobs in red, where it's this has to be done straight away. Yeah. And then everything else in a different colour. I keep a little, because I don't usually have pockets, I try and keep a little bag with me. But if you wear trousers, usually that's not a problem. But I think just making sure you got your bleep, making sure you got your badge, stethoscope. I always forget my stethoscope in my bag, but I usually keep a roll of tape also on my stethoscope, because if you're bleeding a patient, you can never find a roll of tape.
Personally, I went in 5 minutes early and had just written out the ward list before ward round started, because we tended to have a board round before the ward round, so we'd meet up, chat about all the patients before we went to see them. So in that, you get a good idea of who everyone is, what's going on, and you can jot down the initial jobs then. You have to keep a jobs list, because otherwise you will miss stuff. It's difficult to keep organised on calls and things. But I think if you are organised, you'll know when your workload's getting to the point where you can't manage it. And that's the point you need to go and tell someone that you're not going to get through all those jobs.
And what about those situations where you feel out of your depth and need help from a senior?
it's often a concern at the start that you're raising too many things, but I think it's quite reassuring to know that that's absolutely fine. It's absolutely fine to raise a lot of things, and that's completely the better direction to go than not escalating things which do need.
Yeah.
It's always easier to sort things out. It's always easier to call the crash call for someone where they might not need it than the other way around. It's always better for you, the team, for the patient to escalate things. And at the start, people are expecting it. It's okay.
Yeah.
They are waiting, and they're happy to take those calls. But when you do escalate things, and for example, if you escalate something which they later say you might be able to manage it on your own, is take it as a learning experience and kind of learn from every one of these. What kind of skills and what kind of knowledge have you learned from this? That means actually, if I saw this in the future, I'll be happy to deal with it on my own again.
I think the worst thing you can do is leave a point of escalation too far down the line. You know, this patient had been seen 10 minutes earlier by the reg, probably would have made a quicker difference, kind of thing. I think registrars understand, you know, they've all been there and they've all gone to that point. They'd rather that you ask them for help if you're struggling rather than just leaving it at the point where it's drowning.
We've talked a lot about the ins and outs of FY1 life, but something I'm sure everyone's curious about is whether maintaining a work-life balance is easier or harder than it has been at medical school.
It's just similar to med school, but a bit easier, if anything, I think. Obviously, sometimes you're doing nights or weekends, and then it's more difficult. But you've got a whole new group of people to hang out with and do stuff with, because you've got all the F1s and F2s. And also, you can do your hobbies relatively easily. Occasionally, you'll miss them because of your shifts or whatever. But you don't have to do any work when you're not at work.
That's so nice.
Sense, which is great.
Yeah.
So when you come home, that's it. You can stop working.
Yeah.
You don't have to revise. So your evenings and weekends are suddenly your own again.
Yeah.
Which I found really great, actually, because you can completely switch off from work. So when you're not there, you're absolutely not there, and you don't have to think about it. So you can actually do more in the evenings. You can go out for dinner, you can do your hobbies, sport, music, whatever. I do a lot of singing, and that's been absolutely fine.
I've preferred it to being a medical student in the sense now that we're getting paid. It's quite nice to have some money.
Yeah, very nice.
It's not all about the money, but I think last year of medical school is quite tricky because, you know, you've got that NHS bursary which doesn't cover a lot. But work-life balance, it does take a lot of adjustment. It's nice because you have your evenings free now, whereas in med school you were coming home after a day of lectures or placement having to revise for a good few hours. So it's nice you got your evenings free. The problem is, me personally, pretty much all my friends are doctors, so trying to find any time to meet up is quite tricky. And also having a partner who's also an F1 in a different hospital means we hardly ever see each other. But I think instead of moping about it and being I'm never seeing my friends, I'm never seeing my other half, I think when you do have days off together, or when all your friends, you find a weekend where you are free, it's just making the most of it.
It's always difficult moving to a new area, and I appreciate that for a lot of people starting their jobs, it'll be in an area that they're not used to. For example, might be in a different town or city, other part of the country. It's useful knowing that a lot of other F1s are in the same position. And at the start of F1, everyone's very kind of accepting that they're going to meet new people, but you are going to make friends with new people, and you're going to make friends in new regions and new cities around the country, and that's absolutely fine.
And what about time off?
So you get 27 days off, I think. Maybe 28. I think it's 9.5 days each rotation. If you work a bank holiday, you get it back in lieu. And on medicine, if you worked a long day on a bank holiday, you got an extra day and a half. But I don't think it works that way in surgery. On medicine, I felt like I had enough time off because I didn't work as many weekends. On surgery, some of the weeks can be quite intense. But holiday, what you usually do is you can't book holiday if you're working an on-call day or you're working a night, and you can book it on your normal working days. Usually there has to be a set number of juniors on the ward. So if you want to book an annual leave, but too many people have also taken that day, and you weren't the first one to ask, usually it's declined.
You know, most rota coordinators are actually there to help you out, and as long as you give them enough notice, they will help you. But also, your other F1s and junior doctors are nice people.
Yeah.
If you need to swap with someone, someone will swap with you. You know, everyone gets their birthday off. If it's a big event like a wedding or whatever, you have to have that off if you give them 6 weeks notice. But for holidays and stuff, people have always swapped. So yes, it's annoying. Yes, it's more difficult than it should be. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But you'll get it. So don't panic. People are nice.
We've miraculously gone 20 minutes without a mention of COVID-19. I asked the doctors how their jobs have changed in response to the pandemic, and therefore how it might affect us.
Logistically, it's become a nightmare. You know, we are running effectively, at least in my hospital, we're running an on-call rota for the next 4 months. You know, like we're working on no longer normal working days as such, but we're just working on calls non-stop. So I think importantly, you've got to protect yourself mentally and physically. You know, these are tough times. You are dealing with situations you never deal with. Breaking bad news is now becoming a common thing, unfortunately. There was, last week before I had to have the sick period, I probably confirmed 8 or 9 patients, verified deaths of COVID patients 8 or 9 times in the space of 2 days, So you've got to protect yourself mentally. Everyone has their own different coping strategies, but find the one that works for you. Physically, you've got to look after yourselves. There's a lot of this perspective of putting in the extra shifts to help out colleagues or whatever it might be, but actually you've also got to realize, you've worked the last 7 days in a row, you need to have this day off or that aspect, because there's no point you working yourself into the ground and then becoming unavailable because you're sick as a result of it.
I think coming into work in this environment, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. I think I imagine coming into it's incredibly scary, but there's also knowing that this isn't a normal time, and knowing that these are extraordinary measures are being put in place, but there is that support available, and people are incredibly appreciative of the fact that you will be coming into work at the start of your career in this environment, and there is going to be a lot of support for you and a lot of understanding for that. I would try and make sure that you know all your escalation plans and know who you need to be kind of contacting, just so that you do know if stuff really does start to hit the fan, you know who to ask for help for.
All rotations have been cancelled. They're starting to redeploy people to different departments, but obviously that means that right now we don't really have rotas. We don't really know where we're working, so things like booking annual leave, that is really, really difficult. So they've told us to remain flexible, which is not super helpful, but the trouble is that the situation's changing daily. So they're trying to update us when they can, but it's really hard.
So after all that, if you're still feeling pretty nervous about starting work, which I definitely am and I think is completely normal, here is a final pep talk from Kitty and Jess.
I think honestly, just try not to panic. It is a weird time to come in, but everyone was so lovely when we first arrived. Like, people expect almost nothing of you, so everything you do is sort of a bonus in a way. Everyone's so nice to you. They remember how it feels to be an F1. Asking for help is never stupid. Like, don't worry about stuff. I was really panicked because my practical skills weren't the best when I started, so I was super worried about being asked to do 20 cannulas and not being able to do any of them. But it's all fine.
I think just that your first month as a doctor is terrifying. I think I'm a very, very anxious person. So like the weeks before becoming a doctor, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm not looking forward to this. But it is a very rewarding job. I think F1's got quite a reputation of being something you just got to get through, and it's terrible, and you're not going to like it, and no one likes it. But I'm really enjoying it. Like, I'm enjoying going. I'm looking forward to going to work. Like, on my days off, I am kind of missing work. And if you'd asked me this month, a couple of months ago, I would have said, like, no way. Like, I'm not enjoying this. But I think It takes about 6 months for me personally. It took me about 6 months to really settle in, which I know sounds like a long time, but it really does fly by. Like, I can't believe I've been a doctor now for 8 months. It's crazy, but it is a rewarding job. It's hard, and sometimes you're not going to enjoy it, but you can't expect to enjoy it every day. But just keep at it. You've worked really hard for this. Like, if you think you've done at least 5-6 years, like, it is all worth it in the end. I'm really enjoying it. And I'm not the most optimistic person.
You've sold the job.
It's because I've had 2 days off. But no, it's a good job. I'm enjoying it. Those are my final words.
This is Jeff signing out. Thank you so much to Elgan, Kitty, Edwin and Jess for their really useful insight into life as an F1. And also thank you for listening. I really hope your first few months are as stress-free as can be during these unprecedented times. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to hear more from us, please consider subscribing through your podcast provider. You can also follow Geeky Medics on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook. We'd love to hear from you with suggestions on who you'd like to hear from next. As ever, thank you to the producers of this podcast, Dr. Alice Appleton and Dr. Lewis Potter.